So my name's John Gilbert, and I come here from Phase One and Mamiya Leaf, which is one of our sister brands. Anyway, what we want to talk about today is tethering in Capture 1.7. And basically, if we look at tethering, it's this whole concept of shooting directly from the camera straight to the computer. We're bypassing the CF card, and so we're getting the raw file directly on our computer. We can apply adjustments to it, we can see it instantaneously, and we can work on it from there. And so we want to look at why we would do that, what are the benefits of doing that, and of course, how are we actually going to manage that within Capture One? A little bit of my background. I've been with Phase One for 7 years now. I work in the tech support department, and I do a lot of training. I've developed a lot of training programs for Phase One surrounding our cameras, digital backs, our software. So I've been doing a lot of that the last few years, but before I came to Phase One, I was working as a digital tech. And if you're unfamiliar with what a digital tech does, what a digital tech does is they work on a photo shoot with a photographer running the computers, running the cameras. So I would show up, couple computers in tow. I'd have the camera system with me, all the lenses, the digital backs, the bodies, a bunch of cables. And I was the one responsible for making sure everything that was shot on the camera was on the computer. And in hundreds of photo shoots that I worked on, 99% of those, we shot tethered. And our commitment to tethering was so much that I would be out in the Caribbean, standing in 2.5 feet of water with a laptop sitting on a tripod with a firewire cable coming out of that laptop going into a $30,000 camera in the middle of the water, because shooting tethered added so much to the workflow, added so much to the security of knowing we got the shots that we needed, that we were going to do it in any scenario that we could possibly figure out a way to do so. And that's really, what we kind of want to cover here is, what do we get out of this? How do we do it? So number one, why am I going to tether? Well, basically, tethering is all about saving time, right? If I'm shooting to a CF card, I can get a little preview of the images on the back of the camera. I can kind of check focus, but for the most part, I don't really know what I have until I download those files to the computer. So the number one thing that tethering is going to do is it's going to give me a full screen preview of my images. But not only that, because I have the raw file on my computer, instead of looking at a quick rendering from the camera, I'm able to get the full raw file rendering of Capture One. So we're going to get the same detail reproduction that Capture One has. We're going to have all the color management that's built into Capture One. And then anything that I do to those files within Capture One, if I need to make it a black and white file, if I want to change the exposure, if I want to modify the color, I can do all that into Capture One, have all those adjustments being applied automatically, so that what I'm dealing with in Capture One is a direct representation of what my final product is. I can shoot direct to the final product instead of figuring out, do I have it in camera, don't I have it in camera? You're going to know. Am I tack sharp? I can zoom into 100% and look at every pixel and tell if I'm tack sharp. And we can do that in real time when we're tethering. That's the real benefit, keeping track. We're just going to take questions at the end, guys, to write everything down. Chances are I'll cover it as we're going through, but again, just for the video. Number two, what do we need to make this happen? And again, just looking at this very simply, number one, I have Capture One Pro. Capture One has a couple different versions. We have Capture One Express, we have Capture One Pro. The difference between the two is a feature set. Capture One Express is made to be very simple. It doesn't include the tethering feature. So if we're looking at Capture One version-wise, we do need to have Capture One Pro. Number two, I need a camera which is supported by Capture One to tether. So obviously, Phase One, in addition to being a software maker, we're a company that makes medium format digital backs, medium format camera bodies. So we of course support our two brands, Phase One and Mamiya Leaf. So those are supported. And in addition to that, we can tether DSLRs from Canon and Nikon. And if we go a little more specific there into what cameras are supported, this is going to vary based on the version of Capture One. The way we handle tethering with a company like Canon or Nikon is that, and the reason we actually tether with those two companies is that they produce what's called a software developer's kit. And in a nutshell, a software developer's kit is the collection of drivers that we need to implement their tethering methods into our own software. Since these two companies do that, we're able to tether with their cameras. And so what is actually supported in Capture One for tethering is what the manufacturer is distributing at that time for support through their SDK. So typically what this means is most cameras that are relatively current are going to be supported. Cameras that are much, much older may no longer be supported. It just depends on when the manufacturer decides to stop producing drivers for them. And then with new cameras, so if a camera comes out tomorrow, chances are support will come into Capture One within 2 to 3 months. It usually takes time for the drivers to be made available by Canon or Nikon, and then it's going to take us a little bit of time to implement that. So typically a couple month delay on a brand new system. The last thing, of course, we would just need is the proper cable. So I've got two systems with me today. This is a Mamiya Leaf Credo 40 system. It has both USB 3 port here on the side and a FireWire 800 port in the back. We're going to tether via USB 3. I also have a Canon 5D Mark III down here. This has a USB 2 connection, so we've got a USB 2 cord there for it. So basically, you just need the proper cable to actually get yourself connected. So with all that said, let's get a camera connected and let's take a couple shots. Start out with Mamiya here. So the camera's on, Capture One is on. I'm going to plug it in. And in a couple seconds, it's just asking me if I want to register this. I do not at the moment. And we're connected. So in general, your connection should be little more than plug and play. Camera's on, computer's on, Capture One is open, connected up, it's going to tether. The only things that might interrupt that, if I'm not seeing it tether, is I want to look at, do I have some other software running that might be stealing the connection? So if I was trying to tether the 5D Mark III and I had Canon's EOS utility software running, that may interrupt and steal the connection away from Capture One. But since I only have Capture One running, it's going to see the camera and it's going to connect right up. Just turn on our little light over here. Some light on the scene. Let's take a shot. All right, so we've got an image. And if I continue to shoot, the next file is going to come up. And so each time I take a shot, a new file comes in. Now, the first thing we're going to notice is that my color is wildly off. It's quite warm. It appears I'm capturing in a daylight setting. So if we grab the gray balance dropper here from the camera tool, we can correct that, choosing our neutral balance here. So I've got a gray card sitting in front of our candy dish there. The neutral patches on the bottom give me a reference that when I click on it with a gray balance dropper, it'll give me a nice neutral color balance. The other thing I'd say is I'm a little bit bright. I'm going to tone down my exposure setting here. Let's take another shot. Now there's one thing you should notice there is that when I took the new capture, my color correction from the previous image carried over. And that's what we want to see here. That's what we're looking to get out of Capture One. That's what Capture One brings to this, this whole setup, is that as I make adjustments, those adjustments are going to take place going forward. If I want to come in and change this to a black and white, we'll just pull out the saturation. Take another shot. I'm going to have that applied to the image. So the idea is that whatever adjustments I'm making to my images to get the look that I want in the file, we're going to give you that right away. And so where I want to go from here is, now that we're tethered up, now that we're moving, is what are the sorts of tools that we give you in Capture One to manage tethering? How do I control what's getting applied to the file as we shoot? How do I control what's being brought up on screen and what's not? Okay, so number one, if we start out in our camera tab here, we've got a couple tools. So top to bottom, you've got a basic exposure evaluation. It's just going to give you a general run of your histogram as well as approximately where we think that falls on a scale of is this a good exposure or not. We have next capture naming. This is where we're going to control what the files get named. Whenever we tether, we're basically bringing in files that don't have a naming convention in and of themselves. We're getting them before they've been stored out as a file. Therefore, we need to choose what to call them. After that, next capture location. This is a place where we can choose where am I storing the files. They have to go to some folder on our computer, and so that's going to allow us to do that. Below that is next capture adjustments. This is going to control how do we decide what adjustments to apply to the image. So in this case, when this image came in, we adjusted the color and then we made it black and white. Those were adjustments that were applied to the image. This tool controls how that actually works. Lastly, we have our camera settings. So this is going to be things like white balance, ISO, raw file type, and then camera controls. This will vary depending on what camera you have connected, which options you will have available there. Some cameras we can control certain things, other cameras we control other things, and then depending on what mode the camera is in, whether it be manual mode or aperture priority or program, that's going to affect our ability to adjust shutter and aperture and so forth. But these fields will populate automatically. So starting out, looking at this idea of next capture adjustments, there's a couple different ways we would handle this. So right now I'm on the default settings, which is described as ICC profile is default. So ICC profile is our color starting point. The default means that we're going to choose the color profile that Capture One has decided is the default. So if I'm working with the Canon 5D Mark III, there's really only going to be one profile available to me, so I don't need to change anything there. With this Credo 40, we have a couple different profiles we could choose from. So if I wanted to override the default setting, I could choose that here. Everything else we treat as separately from color management, because color management sort of gives us our fundamental starting point. Everything else is applied on top of that. So everything else that I apply, so my saturation change, my color change, and so forth, this all comes from copy from last. And what this means is that whatever happened on the last capture that I had is going to get applied to the next one. So right now it's black and white, so my next shot will inherit those black and white settings. And if I change this, so we do just a little bit of color and then maybe add some clarity and a vignette. Because that's my last capture, the next image will inherit that as well. But if I were to go back to this previous capture and take my saturation change completely off, that will only stay on that image because the last capture had these settings applied to it. So that's the concept of copy from last. And this is sort of the default value. This is what benefits most people's workflows. That said, if you work a little bit differently, it does change what features you may want to use there. For instance, if we go back to that menu, I have this other option here, which is copy from primary. What copy from primary does is it's no longer concerned about what happened on this specific capture, so my last image. What it cares about is what image is selected on screen. That's called our primary image, because, for instance, we call it a primary image because I could have several images selected, but only one of them can be the primary. So in this case, right now, my last image happens to be the primary image. Therefore, the next capture is going to come in with the same adjustments applied to it. However, if we select this image is now my primary image, because it's the one that's selected, it's the one that's brought up on screen. And so even though my last capture had some color to it, the next one that comes in is going to be black and white. And that's the fundamental difference between those two tools. It's sort of a subtle change. When you would use one versus the other is a relatively subtle change. It really depends on what happens while you're shooting. If I'm shooting a lot and I'm shooting consistently, and I have a base set of adjustments that I need applied, maybe it's just color, maybe it's a slight change in contrast, maybe it's just some clarity being added while I'm shooting. If I want that to continue on all my files, and then while I'm shooting kind of go back and make little tweaks, maybe I'm working here, and I find out that when I turn on my highlight tool, that my highlights are blowing out a little bit. And if we look in here, it's about 252, 250, which is not too bad. But maybe I want to pull that back just a little bit, because the way that I'm getting these printed, it's going to be sensitive. I'm going to lose a lot of information there. So maybe we're just going to pull up a little bit of highlight recovery on that. And if I didn't want that going forward to every other image, we could choose copy from last. However, I did that on the last image, so in this case it wouldn't make a total difference if we take the next shot. But the idea is that if I want to go back and tweak individual files for, the lights were a little bright there, or, I didn't have this one light fire, so I need to make it a little bit brighter, or a gel was put over the light, and now I need to adjust the color a little bit. If we want those settings to kind of continue as they are when we go back and edit them, copy from last makes a lot of sense, because I'm always going to have the same thing going forward, but I can tweak previous files. If I want to tweak previous files because they're better representations of what I want to have going forward, copy from primary is going to make a little bit more sense, but it's different for everybody's workflow. The other thing that I want to kind of consider here is how these images are being selected. For instance, right now, you're seeing these files come in, they're sort of orange. They haven't taken on the rest of the settings that are being applied to the file. And if I take a new shot here, you'll kind of see that take place. Comes in, it's orange, it's bright, then it corrects into what I'm looking for. If I don't want to see that happen, we can change this feature that's called Auto Select New Capture. So this is in the camera menu, Auto Select New Capture. This controls when are files selected and brought up on screen. Right now I'm using immediately, which means as soon as the file's on the computer, we're going to display it. And what's happening when you see it in that color and you see it kind of pixelated is that we haven't yet created a preview for the file. The way Capture One operates is that what you see on screen is a separate preview file that we render based on the raw data. That way we can take these huge files from medium format cameras and new DSLRs and things like that and display a manageable amount of data. So we work with a preview system in order to do that. So if I change this to when ready, what this means is that now we won't select that new file until Capture One has had a chance to generate that preview. So I won't see those colors and I won't see that same type of pixelization. Let's take a new shot. So you see the image appears at the bottom and then it's selected once we have that preview. Again, the file comes in and then we select it when we have actually made the preview. Now, there's reasons why you would use both of these features. The nice thing about when ready is that I don't see that sort of jarring change from initial setup to what it finally ends up being. The downside is that if I'm working pretty quick, I end up being a little bit farther behind what's actually coming in. And depending on how well my computer is able to keep up with generating previews, I could end up not seeing certain images on screen. So for instance, right now I've got a pretty fast computer, and we do a pretty good job when it comes to our own files. And so I was never too far behind, and we saw each of these images as the previews were generated. But one thing we tend to see happen is that, let's say you have 10 images that have already been transferred into the computer because you're shooting rapidly, but we haven't been able to generate previews for all of them. What may happen is that at a certain point, Capture One will start to generate more recent images, generate previews for more recent images, because it wants to try and catch up to what you're doing. Eventually, the other images will fill in with previews and with all the correct data. You're not going to lose anything in terms of settings getting applied. But what can happen is that I might go from seeing this image to seeing this image, and then seeing this image, and I didn't see these things in between. For some people's workflow, that matters. For some people's workflow, that doesn't matter. If I'm here shooting the still life scene the way I am now, doesn't really matter. I'm also probably not going to be shooting rapidly. But if I'm shooting fashion, and I have an art director who's monitoring the shots as they come in and paying attention to body shape and things like that in the shots, when ready might drive them a little bit nuts, because they're not going to be seeing the most recent image. They may miss images along the way, and so forth. And so for those situations, that's where we see immediately making a lot more sense, because even if I don't see the full rendered preview while I'm shooting quickly, at the very least I'm going to get an idea of what's actually going on in the shot. You know, I get some sort of visual feedback for every file that comes in. So when I've worked on set, when I've managed a lot of things, I'm generally using immediately, even though you get that pixelated preview for a portion of it, simply because you're getting feedback on what you're actually shooting as close to the point that you're actually shooting as you can. Does that make sense? So that's kind of the basic overview of tethering. You know, getting files in, applying adjustments based on a couple different things, controlling how they get selected on screen. What I want to kind of do now is kind of go back through the same process, but show you the more, I don't want to call it obscure, but the more specialized ways, because there are other settings in each one of those, and other settings that will benefit you under certain circumstances. But I didn't want to throw it all at you all at once, because then, you know, we tend to lose sight of the sort of the very simple setup. So, number one, where are the files going? So, right now I'm working in a session in Capture One. We can shoot tethered either to a session or to a catalog. If you're familiar with sessions and catalogs, you probably have one that you like to work with. If you're not familiar with what sessions and catalogs are in Capture One, the very basic version of that is that a catalog means Capture One is going to operate very similar to Aperture, very similar to iPhoto, very similar to Lightroom. In other words, you have a catalog of the files can be stored many places, and you can kind of view them all together. So when I'm shooting tethered to a catalog, I'm going to decide not only where do the files get stored on my computer, but then I'm going to go back in and decide where in the catalog do I want to view these files. I'm working in a session right now. What a session allows me to do is just build a folder structure on my computer and deal with those folders. So in this case, the way this folder actually looks on my computer is like this. Here's my session file. I've got a capture folder, which has these raw files in it. We've got an output folder to process to, selects to store the good images, and a trash folder so that I'm not automatically throwing things away. What I can be doing then in Capture One is, let's say I don't always want to shoot to this capture folder. Let's say we change what we're shooting midway through the day, and we want to keep those files organized into separate folders. So what I could do is, let's say I had, call it Capture 2. let's say we had another folder in there. I can go and select this as a capture folder, right-click or control-click on it, or I could go up to the File menu as well and say Set as Capture Folder. And it's just asking me if I want to remember the previous one as a favorite. For the time being, I do not. And so now I'm going to physically be shooting to a different folder. So now when we take a shot, I'm going to get a file there. So all we did there was change what folder we're actually shooting to. And if I want to go back, right-click on it again, Set as Capture Folder. And now we're back to shooting here. So that's basically changing through capture folders, shooting to different locations. Now there I did it through the Finder, and I went in and just found a folder that I wanted to use, right-clicked on it, set it as my capture folder. My other option is under Next Capture Locations, where it says Store Files. Here I can go in and actually choose a specific folder on my computer that I might want to shoot to. So it's just another way of accessing where you want to shoot. When I was working as a digital tech, we would usually have maybe 10 folders lined up for the day for each outfit change. We'd work through the Finder and just change the capture folder throughout the day. Some people, if you just prefer to use a menu like this, whatever's easiest for you, but they both ultimately do the same thing. The other thing we would look at here is naming. Right now I'm using just a sort of a very basic naming convention. Because the files, again, because they don't come in with actual names, we need to tell them what to do. This is basically the default right now, which says name, which corresponds to this field here where I can type something in, and then the camera counter. So it's just pulling the shot count directly from the camera and using that to establish what the number should be. Now the way we handle naming in Capture One is what we call token-based naming. So if I press the button right beside it to edit the naming function, I can change the tokens involved in naming. In other words, I can change the variables that we're going to use to establish what the name should be. So rather than use this name field here, I might change this to folder name. That means that the name is going to be derived from the folder that the files are being stored in. This is something that's very useful if I am shooting to different folders throughout the day. If I'm shooting to different folders throughout the day, I probably have different names for each folder. I probably have different names for the images. So rather than have to build the folder, change my capture folder, and then change my naming, if I set it to be folder name, it will inherit the name of the folder itself. And that leaves me one less thing that I have to edit throughout the day. So folder name, I'm going to put in an underscore because I like underscores. And then let's add a separate counter. And we'll say 4 digits. I'll just drag that up there. And so now I have a name that's just going to be the name of the folder that the file is going to, and then a 4-digit counter, which we're going to reset the counter on so it's starting at 1. And so now this will be a counter specific to Capture One. It'll start at 1 and go up from there. Oops. So let's take a shot and see if we get that. Yep, capture 001. The folder that's being stored into is called capture, therefore the file name becomes capture, and the counter starts at 1 and goes forward. So moving along, if we go back to Next Capture Adjustments, there's a couple of other settings in there. And to illustrate these, I'm actually going to switch to the Canon here, because it's going to end up making a lot of sense as to why you would use it. And what we're going to look at is a feature that's in there which is called Copy from Clipboard. All right. So 5D Mark III is tethered, ready to go. And let's get a shot first. Little bright. That's better. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to change this from copy from primary to copy from clipboard. And so that's the last item on the list there. And let's take another shot. See what we get. Ooh, it's already doing stuff for me because I left this setting from last time. Let's just clear out our clipboard really quick. There we go. So with copy from clipboard, we are going to get our settings from what we call our adjustments clipboard. Now, what the adjustments clipboard exists to do is to manage how do we copy how do we copy adjustments from one image to another. So under normal conditions, what you'd have is that I would adjust one file. You know, maybe we play with the exposure, the color, the contrast, and so forth. And then when I have 50 other images that I want to look at the same as that one image, we'll do it like this. We'll take that, do that, and if I copy from the clipboard, anything that I've modified gets copied onto the clipboard, much like if you copy and paste text, we're copying and pasting adjustments. So the clipboard shows me what tools have actually been copied. And then if I select more images, we can apply those settings to all of them. So now they uniformly have all the same adjustments applied to them, albeit there's some slight changes in exposure on the camera side there. But at the end of the day, we've applied all the same thing. Now, where this comes into play as the clipboard basically says that we can go down here and grab this image. And reset it. So remember, I'm not copying from last, but I'm getting whatever is stored within this clipboard. And so now when I take a shot, I get an image which a little desaturated, a little extra contrast. My color is off because this is shot with a Canon and the other was shot with a Mamiya Leaf back, and they're going to produce different colors, so I'll need to redo my color here. There we go. But fundamentally, I'm getting all my things from the clipboard. Now the question is why would we want to do this? Well, on the one hand, if we think about copy from last, I don't have to do any work. I put it on copy from last, I adjust the image, I take the next shot, and everything happens. With this, I have to actually copy my settings in order for them to carry over going forward, and if I don't do that, they won't. So that's the first part is why would I use this? Well, this comes into play because of the way we actually handle the copying. There are certain tools which are excluded from being copied normally. And the reason they're excluded is because more often than not, they're probably going to create an issue for you. For instance, if I'm shooting and I hold the camera like this, it's going to come in horizontal. And if I hold the camera vertical, the image comes in vertical. Now, if you think about it, the first image that came in specifically had a horizontal orientation. We could have copied that and applied it to this image, which came in with a vertical orientation from the camera, but we didn't because this image wouldn't look right. So we exclude those orientation changes from being detected automatically because we don't want them to get you in this sort of never-ending loop of never getting the right orientation on your images. So if I take a shot like this. Let's see if we can. Wow, it got good. It got smart. Normally, the problem that we typically run into is that we often don't have a good way of telling what is vertical and what is horizontal. In this case, interestingly enough, the camera is doing a wonderful job of figuring out which way I'm intending to have it point, which it did not do in this morning's, and it should not be able to do at all. Let's try this. Well, bear with me, we're gonna fake it. That is too funny. Typically what you have in a camera is basically a roll sensor. So it can detect when it's upright, it can detect when it's side to side. When a camera's pointed straight down, that sensor no longer works properly. So it's relying on triangulating a whole bunch of other items to kind of figuring out. And I suspect it's determining this somewhat from my movements. That said, I know from experience, and I know from this morning's seminar, and I know from the many support cases and questions that we get about it, that we cannot reliably count on a camera that's pointed straight down to know exactly which orientation you intended to work with. So where copy from clipboard really comes into play is that we can override what the camera is doing, because the camera is making a decision about whether this should be a horizontal image or a vertical image. So if I have a horizontal image, and let's say that's not what I wanted the image to be. I wanted it actually to look like that. I've made an adjustment from Capture One, but as we discussed earlier, we're not automatically bringing over orientation because it can be problematic. So even though I've rotated the orientation here, my next shot would be vertical. Even if I'm on copy from last, it's going to be vertical like this because we're going to ignore that orientation change. What we can do with copy from clipboard is we can force it to include the orientation change. So I can go back to this image. In the adjustments clipboard, we'll say copy. And then I will check the box next to orientation. So we're going right here to orientation, checking that box. That forces it to inherit that orientation piece of the image. And now this should get carried over to our next shot. There you go. So copy from clipboard is most appropriate for situations where what we're really trying to do is override Capture One's natural behavior. We can also think about it as a way of determining exactly what's going to get applied, but most workflows, copy from last will still do that fairly effectively. So I typically teach people to do this based on their need while shooting straight down to control orientation with a camera which they can't necessarily control orientation on. One of the downsides with a lot of DSLRs is that, for instance, on this camera, I can turn off the automatic orientation, but I can't tell it to only use a certain orientation. Whereas with the digital backs, we have the ability to do that via software. With the DSLRs, we don't have that ability via software because it's just not supported within the drivers. But this will get you there. and it's another thing to think about. So that's sort of the little more advanced side of looking at how do we deal with next capture adjustments and so forth. The other thing that we can look at in a little more advanced way is this idea of auto-select new capture. So one of the things we kind of talked about with, when ready was nice because you get the full view. The downside is you don't always keep up so well. Immediate's nice because you get a really quick version of the file. Now, one of the problems, though, with immediately is that while it's great for following along and seeing that everything that you expect to have happen is happening, what it's not great at is allowing you to do a lot of stuff to the image before the next one comes in. And I'll give you an idea what I mean here. Let's just take a shot. Make a couple adjustments here. So if I'm shooting pretty rapidly here, and I wanted to stop and check focus, what may happen is this. Because we're still waiting on these previews to be generated, I can't actually see what the focus is doing. But if I actually stop and wait for a preview, now I can see what my focus is doing. So this is the challenge. So if I'm the tech and I'm running the computer and I'm in charge of letting the photographer know when they're not in focus, but they're continuing to shoot, I may not have an opportunity to do that. At the same time, the art director really wants me using immediately because they want to see exactly sort of, what's happening overall in the scene while we're shooting. They want to see every frame as it comes in, and when they don't see every frame that comes in, they get nervous that either they're missing something or that the camera's not working, and we don't want either of those things to happen. So we want to be on immediately, but we also want to be able to check focus, make minor adjustments, and do other things. So here's how we can make that work. The balancing point here is this feature in the menu called auto pause. What auto pause is going to do is it allows me to pause this selection feature so that I have enough time to check focus and to make minor adjustments before going back to seeing every file that comes in. And what this does is, the way the pause works is that if I select a different image, Capture One will now stay on that image. The rest of the images are still coming in, they're still getting their settings applied to them, but Capture One isn't showing them. And so while the images are still being shot, I can double click and see what's going on in the file. And I actually can do that without having to wait. And the way we get this back then, go back to the menu, and now you can see because it's paused, immediately shows as paused. So the way you unpause this is to reselect immediately. And now when we shoot, new files are coming in again. Now, as is in the program, it's a little cumbersome to use. It's really easy to pause. Selecting another file is how you pause it. So if I hit the back arrow, it's now paused. If I hit the forward, now paused. Now it's paused, right? But to unpause it, I have to go to this menu, go to here, click that, and that can be a little bit of work. Easier way to manage this is what I've actually done, and I did this ahead of time, because this is how I work. I set a keyboard shortcut on immediately, which is Command P. If you've never set a keyboard shortcut before in Capture One, you have the ability to modify our existing shortcuts. And the way you do that is you go to the Capture One menu, choose Edit Keyboard Shortcuts. And when you come here the first time, it'll be set to defaults. You're not allowed to edit the defaults. But you can duplicate it, choose a name, And then each of these items here is a menu at the top of the screen. So in this case, I would go to Camera, Auto Select New Capture, and I want the shortcut to be on immediately, because clicking immediately again is what restarts that whole process of selecting the images. So I'll just double click beside this, type Command P, hit return, and that's how I set that keyboard shortcut. So again, remember my preview is paused, or it's not currently paused, but it should be paused now. You can see it is paused. So any shooting that I do now, it's coming in, but it's not being shown on screen. Command P, and now we're back to updating. So again, I can select another image. That pauses it. I can check focus. Command P. And I'm back to updating again. So if you start thinking the more advanced feature of how do we control what's on screen, by itself, Capture One is just going to continually select the new images as they come in. But auto pause allows me to control when that does and does not happen in a way that's much, much more manageable. Again, looking back over camera controls, a couple things that you have going on here. You'll see my camera controls here for the Canon will update automatically as I change. So if I change the mode on here, the items that I have accessible are being read out and changed in Capture One. So we can control that. Manually. Basically every DSLR, whether it be Canon or Nikon that we're supporting, you have access to the camera controls. On the digital back side, it's a little bit more nuanced because we make a lot of digital backs that mount to other manufacturers' cameras. In those cases, we typically don't have the ability to control the camera. But when I'm using, for instance, this is a Mamiya Leaf. This one's a Credo 40 on a Mamiya 645 DF Plus. It's our back, it's our body. We have all the communication standards in place. We know how to communicate between the two, so we do have camera controls with that setup as well. My general rule of thumb, what I tell people if they're having this issue and they're trying to troubleshoot, is that if camera controls show up, it's because it's supported. If camera controls don't show up, it's most likely not supported. From here in the camera menu, this button, this controls live view. So if we crank live view up here, I'll get a new window pops up. This is my live view window. This is our video feed out of the camera. With the Canon, we do have focus controls here. So as long as I have autofocus turned on, we can control our focus from Capture One. A lot of times the way you'll do this is to zoom in on the image. And I'm going to go to 200% here, and I'll explain why in a second. And then I'll use the finer control. So if you think about, we have focus going multiple directions. The small arrow is really fine control, so I'm doing a number of clicks here to move at a very short distance. The next one over is sort of a medium range focus and then a far range focus. So, depending on how far you need to go, kind of determines which focus button you want to be clicking to dial that focus in. Now, the other thing that I mentioned there is I went to 200% when I zoomed in. And if I zoom out to 100%, so we put this at just 100%, I'm getting this really choppy pixelated image. And this is occurring because there's a little bit of a disconnect between these percentage numbers and what we're actually getting from the camera. And it's a little confusing like that because we're trying to use the same controls and the same functions for a wide range of cameras. And so what we have happening here is that a live view feed from a DSLR doesn't work the same way as a raw file. With a raw file, 100% is I'm looking at each individual pixel as a pixel on screen. In live view, I don't get that same output from the file. When I zoom into 100%, I don't get data from each pixel. The camera doesn't magically start giving me data from each pixel. Because this camera is actually set up to do video and essentially goes into a video mode when you do live view, what you're getting is a different resolution video feed at different zoom levels. So 2fit is your basic screen res video feed that the camera produces. 100% is just scaling that up to what would be equivalent 100% size in Capture One. And then at 200%, we actually step up to the next video feed from the camera. So if I'm working with a 5D Mark III or a Nikon D800 or any camera that's doing video natively, I'm generally going to just sort of skip over that 100 setting, go straight to 200 because it's going to produce a separate feed. It's going to produce either 720 or 1080 or something. It's going to give me something with higher resolution which I can actually use to judge focus by. Because again, you can see how much that clears up as soon as I go to 200%. And what this is it's an issue with naming in our software. We changed the feed because we started producing different digital backs that had different live video capabilities, and we wanted everything to follow sort of one setup. And so maybe we need to go back and rethink the naming. But overall, just so you're not terribly confused, it is okay, go straight to 200%. But that's live view. We can use it for composing, we can use it for focusing. The only thing we can't do is capture directly from here. When I close the window, camera goes back to regular. Now we can capture again. And of course it re-auto-focused. The other thing I want to look at in camera controls is a way that we can do this a little more remotely. So the last item that we've got here in the Capture tab is Capture Pilot. And what Capture Pilot allows you to do is, over a local Wi-Fi network, broadcast both images as well as camera controls. So what I'm going to do is right now, I have my computer set up to generate its own wireless network because I don't really have a local area network to access at the moment. If I was working in a studio, we would just have our own sort of studio Wi-Fi going on there. But in this case, I don't have access to an existing wireless network, so I just created my own. On a Mac, you can do that through Create Network. It's often referred to as an ad hoc network, if you ever heard that term before. What I'm going to do now on my phone here is I'm going to connect my phone to the same wireless network that my computer's running on. So now my phone and my laptop are on the same wireless network. It means we can make a nice local connection. And if I go into the Capture Pilot down here, I'm going to say Start Image Server. Start Image Server means we're going to start broadcasting what we have in Capture One. And once I've done that, it shows up on my phone under BH Tethering. So just so you know what I did on my side, we have an app for iOS called Capture Pilot. It's a free app. It's for iPhone, iPad, anything that runs Apple's iOS. So that's what I'm launching into. And when I select that, I can see on my phone the images that are on my computer. And I can do things like zoom in to check focus. I can give them star ratings, color tags, I can view the histogram and so forth. But perhaps equally as important is we have a little add-on feature, which is camera control. And what camera control allows me to do is remotely control my camera using the phone. And the support on the app side is we can control any camera that's tethered and controllable through Capture One. So as long as I can capture from the software and control the camera from the software, then if I'm tethered to the computer, I can start Capture Pilot and control it from my phone. So let's say we wanted to get a little more depth of field. So instead of aperture f4, let's go f11. Let's try it 25th of a second. Not too bad. Maybe we'll 20th of a second, perhaps. But I'm able to do that all from the phone itself. And again, this is working because we're on the same wireless network. And so this basically becomes a remote control of my computer. And then beyond that, we can view the files. Now, the last thing I kind of want to address from a basic sort of talk standpoint, and then we'll sort of take questions and we can look into anything else that you want to talk about here, is how do we actually improve our existing connection, right? So right now, tethering's been working very nicely for me. No real issues there. Camera's connected right up. They've stayed connected. Images are transferring at a reasonable speed. I haven't been having problems. Now, part of the reason that I haven't been having problems is that I've got good quality cables. Neither of them are terribly long. This is a 16-foot USB 2 cable. That was a 9-foot USB 3 cable. Coincidentally, those numbers are about the approximate length limitation that is written into the USB standards. USB 2 has sort of a maximum length of about 18 feet. Now, maximum lengths for cables are, how to put this, they're conservative by nature, but it's the idea is that on any system that has that sort of USB connection, so say it's USB 3, which is a 9-foot limitation, nearly any USB 3 port and any USB 3 device should be able to carry a signal 9 feet. Beyond that is going to depend on the strength of signal produced by both devices. So what I have here is in my computer, I've got pretty good USB 3 ports. So I'm not terribly concerned about length and tethering stability. But not all computers are built with the same quality ports. Computers running under different circumstances and different load levels and different items sort of plugged into them will have different signal outputs on their USB ports. And when you have a low output from the USB port, trying to tether a camera can sometimes be difficult. The connection may drop, the connection may be slow, and things like that. That happens when we get a low signal. And part of the way that you can get around that, if you're running into that as a problem, the best way to get around that is to actually strengthen the signal. So what I have up on screen here, these are basically powered repeaters. So the first one is this is the Mamiya Leaf Firewire 800 3-port powered repeater. You would take this, you'd pair it with a AC adapter. So this AC adapter, or might even be DC, this plugs in and provides a power source. Then I run one FireWire cable to the computer, one FireWire cable to the digital back, and because I have more power flowing through the connection, it's able to transmit the signal over longer distances. It's able to give you a more stable connection. If I need to draw power from my FireWire connection, this will give me a lot more power to power the camera, and so forth. So this goes a long way towards improving that stability. It's especially important when I want to go 30, 40 feet of cabling. This makes a big difference. On the USB side, my example here is this cable, and this one is exceptionally long. This is the 10 meter, 30-foot version. We'll get up the important end of it here. This is called an active extension cable, but it's sort of the USB version of a powered firewire repeater. And the extension on here, so this cable would plug into this end, and then the other end plugs into the computer. What this is going to do is it's a repeater, so it's going to enhance the signal that we're already getting and help it to carry a much farther distance. So inherently the cable is going to be sort of storing up some of the power that's inside it and using that to power the signal through. So this in and of itself is going to give me a nice way to extend my cable to go a lot longer than 9 feet or 16 feet or something like that. But what's nice about this model here, this one's made by StarTech, is the company, is this comes with a power adapter. So we can introduce external power into the cable as well. So if I'm dealing with a situation where the power output from my computer, the signal output for my computer on the USB isn't reliable enough to give me a strong connection to the camera, adding some power through a cable like this is a good way to increase that signal strength and give you a more stable connection. So, we sort of see a couple different things happen when it comes to USB tethering. On the one hand, if your computer is running well, you may be able to tether up and have no problems. With my computer, I've gone about 50 feet worth of USB 3 cable to a Mamiya Leaf digital back, shooting as fast as I can for as long as I can, and I don't have any connection problems because it's the only thing connected. My computer has good signal output, and that's without adding extra power. But we see a lot of other people running, maybe it's older computers, maybe it's a lower spec'd computer. This is a fairly high-end computer, so if I'm using something of a lower specification, cheaper price, one of the areas that you can typically save money is by using lower quality USB components. So if I have that situation, I may not be able to get the same connection on the same cabling. And so we have a lot of people writing to us in support cases saying, hey, I can't stay connected with this computer. It just every time it takes one shot and then drops out. We ask them to start trying a powered cable extension like this. Voila, they can connect again. If you don't want an extension like this, oftentimes a powered USB hub, as long as it has an external power source, that will help you as well, because the additional electricity being introduced into the cable helps it to carry that signal a little bit better. So that's kind of my number one recommendation for improving connection reliability and stability. Beyond that, we can also say that not all USB ports, not all FireWire ports on computers are created equal. I know that on my laptop, the port that I'm using on this side of it is better than the port on the other side. It has a more direct connection to the logic board and therefore performs more reliably. Both of my ports work pretty well. I've had people write me with the exact same computer saying, I can only use this one port on my computer, the other one will not connect. So those are common things that we see happen as well. The last thing that I would advise is that if you have several things plugged in, try having only the camera plugged in. You'd be surprised how much of your communication bandwidth can be lost to external drives, Wacom tablets, anything else that you might have plugged in via USB that you're just not thinking about. Keyboards, mice, they don't really use much at all, so you don't have to worry about those, but it's a lot of the external peripherals that can start to really zap a lot of your bandwidth and can affect your ability to stay tethered.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.